before we get into today's session.
Are you wearing a hat, Diantha? What is it?
Okay. Good to
Okay, so we're going to continue on as we started last week with seeking love, and we're going to keep working on the worksheet that we started, which I will review with you after I read Baba's work from Discourses. And this is from page 375 and 377. So, the shackles that hold the soul in spiritual bondage consist chiefly of wrong values or falsehoods concerning valuation. Some falsehoods in the nature of wrong beliefs also play an important part in holding the soul in spiritual bondage. All false beliefs are as much creations of Maya as are false values, and they are used by Maya to keep the soul still in ignorance in its clutches. The false beliefs created by Maya are so deep-rooted and strong that they seem to be self-evident. And as we are discovering in our inquiry, we are not always aware of those deeply held beliefs that cause our suffering. And so we are bringing them to the surface and examining them. And then I'm going to continue on with page 377. In surrendering the false belief that he is the ego mind, the individual is called upon to surrender the very core of what he thought himself to be. To shed this last vestige of falsehood is therefore the most difficult thing. A person believes that he is thinking, but in fact, it is the mind that is thinking. The belief that the soul is thinking is due to identification with the mind. It is the mind that thinks and the body that sits. The soul is neither engaged in thinking nor in any other physical actions. So does anybody have any comments from Baba's words in Discourses before we jump into our session? So, and if you are talking, be sure to unmute yourself. I mean, what strikes me is that Baba is telling us we don't think, it's the mind that thinks. And we know how identified we get with our minds. And I'm trusting that each of you who have been coming to these sessions is starting to really notice, oh, there goes that thought. So just as a refresher, the most important thing that we learn in self-inquiry is to learn to disidentify from our thoughts. And so we're going to continue on with that today. We started a few weeks ago working on a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet together about seeking love. And our umbrella statement was somebody, and everybody is picking who that is, doesn't love me enough. And we worked on that. And then last week we worked on what we want them to do. So why don't you put up the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet for a minute, Diantha, because I realized that it's a little bit confusing in the beginning to differentiate the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet from the 4 questions of the work. So you can see here, so last week we worked on number 2, the wants, and we're going to review that today so that we have a recording for all the viewers. So the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet has the umbrella statement, which is number 1, which we have as, they don't love me enough. I am, and then everybody found their emotion with so-and-so because he or she doesn't love me enough. And then last week we worked on, I want them, I say them instead of he or she, so you know who you're working on. I want them to do what I want. And we're going to revisit this today. And what I'd like you to do is go back to your situation, your original situation that you're working on, and just find another image or memory of how the person you're working on didn't do what you wanted them to do. And we're going to take that to inquiry today. And then, as you can see next week, it's number 3 on the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. It's the advice you would give. And so we will have that next week. And then the last week, what you need in order to be happy. So each of these 4 gets taken to the 4 questions and turnarounds of the work. And I just know that hasn't been 100% clear. So you can see the 4 questions at the bottom of the page. Perfect, Diantha. Is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? How do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And number 4, who or what would you be without the thought? And so we do that with each of the first 4 statements in the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. Then just directly to the right of the 4 questions, she has examples of the turnarounds. We do the turnaround to the self. Instead of he lied to me, I lied to me. And then it's called the turnaround to the other, where it would be I lied to Paul. And then the opposite, Paul didn't lie to me, or Paul told me the truth. So that's kind of the template of what we juxtapose in doing the work. And I just wanted to review that with you so that it was more clear. You can download for free this Judge Your Neighbor worksheet off thework.com. And there are many other free resources that you can download. And Diantha and I are working on getting descriptions of each of our video classes online with the video, and then including the PDF that you can download so that you can go deeper into the work. So the different PDFs that we use, like the turnarounds that I put up every week, or you know, in the beginning, we had the 3 kinds of business. We had a session on that, and we had a session on the honest no. So we're going to be working to just get these materials in one place that you can just download yourself. So Diantha, do you need to say anything about that before we move on? Or about anything?
No.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've also talked about the work as being based in Jungian psychology. So Carl Jung discovered that in order for the unconscious to become conscious, we have to project. We project onto whatever is in our world. And then we start believing that it's all happening out there, when in reality, you know, this is just a movie that we've created. You know, Baba says that life itself isn't reality. So reality is something that's internal, that we can experience ongoing as we withdraw the projections, which is what we're doing in our inquiry circle. We're believing that somebody doesn't love us enough, or that they're not giving us, you know, what we want, or that they're not doing what we want. That's a projection. And so the unconscious is projecting outward because we're believing that something out there is going to make us happy, is going to give us what we want. And what we learn to do in self-inquiry, which I've really discovered more and more, is about withdrawing the projections, questioning it, which allows us to integrate it into our own being. And so in session 1 of Seeking Love, we learned that instead of they don't love me enough, we learned I don't love me enough, and I don't love them enough, and they do love me enough. And we start finding examples, which this particular part of our brain that scientists call the interpreter doesn't even want to examine, because we like to keep our story together. There's a familiarity in it. You know, the world is a difficult place. I definitely believe that. You know, people aren't kind, yada, yada, yada. And what happens as we start withdrawing these projections is we notice that if we can just stay in our own business, which is one of the sessions we worked on, we come to see that there's nothing out there that could give us happiness or cause us sorrow. And this is, you know, this is a very deep work. And Baba has even said, you know, that his form is an illusion. So at some point in our work, when we've internalized Baba so much in our hearts, we don't need to project even on him so much, although he's very helpful for us because he's the clean mirror. You know, Baba says we have to get the dust off the mirror of our mind. And when we get the dust off the mirror of our mind, then Baba will be reflected clearly as pure love beyond form, and we will recognize one fine day that we are one with him. So this week, we're going to work on what we want. And when we do number 2 in the work, Byron Katie, who we call Katie, says, this is where you get to whine and complain. So our statement that we're going to work on this week, and you can write it down, is I want them to do what I want. And so I see there's some new people here. And so what you're going to do is you're going to find a situation where you're believing the thought that there's somebody who's not, you want them to do what you want. And when you find that situation, you stick to it, because the work is meditation. And as we dive into this inquiry, you're going to hold that particular situation in mind. Maybe it's an argument that you had. It just needs to be some moment in time and space where you can actually know what room you're in and what time of the day it was. All of these things heighten the awareness where you can bring that situation right up front, and you can feel all the uncomfortable feelings that get repressed. And so our work is to bring them to the surface, honor them as information, and then somehow that non-resistance to them allows us to surrender it. And this will include anger and sadness and deep grief. And it's the work that is a lifetime of work, but I can tell you from my own experience that it gets easier and it gets lighter and better. So while people are finding their situation or thinking about, especially the situation today, I want he or she to do what I want, I'm going to read again from, well, I'm going to read from Effort and Grace, Darwin Shaw's wonderful book. You know, he calls it Open Secrets in Meher Baba's Discourses. And I see Darwin as really such a natural psychologist who has woven Baba's words into his understanding of our consciousness and our unconsciousness. So this is from page 36 and 37 of Effort and Grace. And it's subtitled The Knight and the Damsel. It is wonderful to discover that we have a great reservoir of love within us that can pour forth once we learn how to open the heart center. Many of us around Meher Baba would be aware of the heart center opening and love beginning to flow. His love was like a siphon bringing forth our love for him. We could not help but love him. The result was that our perception was greatly intensified, and we would find ourselves at much deeper levels of consciousness. We would be able to discern values at inner levels more clearly than ever before. We found ourselves supported by new strength because new energies were released, and together with the energies and insight, we found we had more control over our thoughts and desires and feelings within. So I'm going to stop here for a minute. So Baba keeps reminding us that we need to learn to have control over our thoughts and our desires and our feelings. And I find that the self-inquiry of this work supports us in disciplining our mind. It's like reining in those wild horses. And so Darwin goes on to say, our world became not something being imposed upon us, but something we could control more and more. All this is a function of the heart. So it is very important to keep the heart open and soft. In fairy tales, the knight in shining armor defends, protects, and shields the fair damsel. This is an allegory about the mind and the heart. One's mind can be very helpful in defending the equanimity of one's heart center, which is closest to the spiritual realm and should be predominant. The night, the mind, helps maintain the flow of love through the heart center, while at the same time providing an essential control on the samskaric impulses that may try to come through. So here Darwin's talking about the heart. That's where Baba lives. He lives in our heart. That's where he wants to live more and more. And our mind is the night, almost like the masculine part of ourself, that is going to protect the heart and guard these thoughts that are damaging and controlling in a negative way. So as we learn to inquire into these stressful thoughts, we're able to live more and more out of our heart center. Byron Katie says, the question mind drops into its sweet home in the heart. So our goal is to live more and more in our heart. And I see that the mind element is almost like the fierce guardian of the gate to the beautiful heart center. And I'm looking at this picture of Baba that's projected here. And I do feel that very much, that there is an element where the knight or the guardian is protecting the heart in each one of us. And as we purify our thoughts, we are able to dwell more and more in our heart center. So Darwin goes on to say, what we are seeking is peace of mind, which is really peace of heart. This means more harmony, upliftment, more light within, deeper and deeper values. We must ask ourselves what we value the most. If we value peace of mind, peace of heart, we will make the effort to defend the heart, through which we are capable of seeing God. Eventually, we experience a high degree of integration of the heart and the mind. Then, as Meher Baba has said, the false self becomes the lover of the true self. It is a delicate undertaking to gain control of one's thoughts and feelings without any coercion at all. Effort, yes, but not coercion. It becomes a matter of seeing through the samskaric complexes, which are based on erroneous knowledge, beliefs, and limitations, and becoming resourceful enough to take evasive action. All this is in relation to one's own specific samskaras. So in a sense, we're taking evasive action through our self-inquiry work. We're going to lay our very deep and painful thoughts to rest so that the heart center is free to just open more and more. And that's just something I feel so grateful for. And I'm also going to review here once again something from Catching the Thread by Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, pages 153 to 155, where he talks about projection, especially onto a romantic partner. Now, I know all of us are here aren't in romantic relationships, but we may have experienced it at some point in our life. And if not, then you can imagine a painful relationship, a friendship, a family relationship that was painful. And you can extrapolate from this reading how this relates to your own need and the value of withdrawing the projection and integrating it. So this is the beginning of the reading. Projection is responsible for much pain and misunderstanding in love affairs and marriages. We fall in love and marry our own projection only to discover that we are living with someone whom we do not know and possibly do not even like. This can cause confusion and suffering, particularly if there was no understanding of the psychological drama that is being enacted. In many Eastern countries, marriages are arranged and the animus-anima projection is not so influential. Although romantic love has existed throughout history, and can be found in the literature of different cultures, it is only in our Western culture that it is so dominant. The idea of romantic love emerged in our Western culture at the end of the 11th century in the poetry of the troubadours and the rituals of courtly love. Since then, it has increasingly taken hold of our collective psyche, and today it fills the cinema and television screens of our mass culture. We believe in romantic love, enjoy its bliss, and are caught in its tragedy. Is the answer to educate ourselves to withdraw this projection and never marry when we are in love? Should we try to escape this gift? Or is there a secret key that can unlock the conflict it creates? The dynamic of projecting an inner ideal onto an ordinary human being and open up to a higher possibility of loving. I once asked this question to a very wise old man who replied with 2 words, unconditional love. For those who are prepared to suffer the depths of love, unconditional love can open a doorway that can lead us out of the inevitable disillusionment of projection. Unconditional love is all-inclusive. It does not belong to the ego, for it transcends duality, containing the opposites, the human and the divine, the person and the projection. Unconditional love is not a peaceful state, for the lover is thrown between the opposites, confused and tormented by their contradictions. What happens during this painful process is that in the alchemical vessel of the heart, the lover's projections are burnt away together with the ego of the lover. And this is true for us in every relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or our relationship with Baba. He talks about how love burns away all that is not real. The animus anima returns to its place within the heart, not rejected, but transformed through the fire. Then the lover sees in the eyes of his partner, and we can say, or family, or friend, or Baba, not the mystery of his own projection, but the beauty of the soul. The beloved can be seen as he or she really is, both human and divine. But now the inner attention of the lover is withdrawn and looks upon the face of another. The process that began through projection continues within the heart, and we begin to glimpse the real nature of our love affair. For the love for another human being is just a reflection of the only true love affair, the love affair with God. And I would just like to say a few words before we start our inquiry again. What I have noticed through the last decade of working really assiduously with withdrawing my projections, and I'm going to talk about my husband because, you know, Byron Katie says the people you live with are your gurus because they show you everything you don't want to see about yourself. And I just see it every single day. It's so true. And when we can recognize that that's what's happening, instead of blaming or being disappointed or disillusioned, we can actually just go inside and nurture our own hearts. And of course, we are most fortunate because we have Baba too, and he wants us to clear more space so that he can live in our heart until ultimately there's not even that separation, that we are all one. But I have to just stress the anguish of this journey that I still experience. I still experience disappointment and disillusion, and yet it does get lighter and lighter. And so I just want to bring that up because I do feel that this is part of the human condition, which Baba speaks to quite a lot. You know, he wants us to withdraw just all of our attachment to this creation, to this Maya, that our souls have actually, you know, we've created this, or at least our egos have created it. So does anybody have any questions, comments, observations before we continue on with our Judge Your Neighbor worksheet on seeking love outside of ourselves and gradually, gently withdrawing the projections and integrating that energy within our own selves, which includes feeling some pain, anger, and other uncomfortable emotions. So before we begin, I'm just going to pause for a moment in case anybody would like to share. And for our newcomers, when we get to question 3 in the work, then Diantha puts up sub-question, which really help us identify how we react when we believe the thought. But the first 2 questions is just a yes or a no. And so the thought that we're all working on together is, I want them to do what I want. Okay? So hopefully everyone has found their situation. I want them to do what I want. So we're going to begin the inquiry. And so I always like to invite you to take a few gentle breaths and get very comfortable, because you allow yourself to drop inside and just let the inner wisdom arise. Your inner wisdom is your intuition. It's Baba's voice within our heart. Okay. So is it true that you want them to do what you want? And it's just a yes or a no, and everybody can unmute who would like to and just respond. Yes or no. I want them to do what I want.
Yes.
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 Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we move on to the second question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. So we got a lot of yeses, which means that all of us who said yes need to go on to question 2. If we say no, then we just wait for question 3. And on this one, I always ask you to just contemplate deeply for a full minute before you respond. And the reason we do this is because there's what is called the interpreter in the left hemisphere of the brain that wants to keep its story together. It's like, you know, yes, of course I want them to do what I want. But when you stop and actually consider it, it's just possible that you might find, well, no, I don't absolutely know that it's true. So I'm going to ask you to hold your response for a full minute, and then I'll invite you to respond. So here it is. Can you absolutely know that it's true that you want them to do what you want? Just ponder. And this minute also gives you an opportunity to discipline your mind from wandering. The inquiry really helps us gather back that wandering mind into one consideration. And the work is meditation. Baba says concentration is meditation, and we really do concentrate in this self-inquiry. So, can you absolutely know that it's true that you want them to do what you want? And it's just a yes or a no, so go ahead.
Yes.
No.
Probably not, no.
Okay. Yeah. So we're working on our desires. You know, Baba says the cause of suffering is desires.
No.
Thank you, Cliff. And so, but we can't just shut them off. What I have found is that if I can just get them down on paper, get my desires down on paper, and then start questioning them, no, I can find something else. With Baba's, by Baba's grace and with support, I can find that there's other possibilities. And in my situation, the work that I was doing was, which I did talk about in the last few weeks, I wanted my husband to move to Myrtle Beach. And I believed he didn't love me enough. That was my umbrella statement, to move to Myrtle Beach. And I wanted him to do what I want. And then I also mentioned that I was kind of leaving this in the background of my mind. I wasn't ready to face it. And then one morning when I got up early, there was Baba saying, is it true that he doesn't love you enough? And I went through the whole inquiry and came out the other side recognizing many things, which I will refer to in each of the proper statements. But in this one, I wanted him to move to Myrtle Beach. I realized he doesn't like hot weather. He loves living in the Rocky Mountains of Montana. He's not a Baba lover. And why would I do that to him? And I was able to resolve it by just going to Myrtle Beach and spending a nice lengthy vacation there. And now we have the virtual inquiry circle where I get to share what I love, which is combining Baba's words and Jungian psychology with self-inquiry of Byron Katie. So, has everybody found their yes or no? And you can't give a wrong answer. It's perfectly fine to give a yes or a no. We're going to move on to question 3. So Diantha, if you could put up the sub-questions. What happens when we do question 3, which is how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? We tend to go into a story. And so the reason that the sub-questions are so valuable is because it helps us not go into the story of, well, this is happening and that is happening. So that's how we keep from finding what's really true for us. We just keep running our stories. So I like to use these sub-questions, which Katie has evolved over the years. And the first one we're going to do is I'm going to have you discover what emotions you feel when you're believing the thought that you want them to do what you want. So just take a few gentle breaths and just notice, how do you react? What happens when you believe the thought that you want them to do what you want? What emotions do you feel when you believe that thought? And anyone who's willing, please unmute and just share the emotions you feel in your situation.
Nervous.
Nervous.
Anxious and stressed.
Yes. Yes.
I feel freed up because I'm
Did you say freed up, Jackie?
yeah, because
Well,
I'm
listen, Jackie, you're such a positive person. We don't have to take our positive emotions to inquiry. It's like when you're having a good dream, enjoy it. When you're having a nightmare, we question our thoughts and wake up. Now I know because we've worked together that you might still find something about when you go back to your situation from which you're writing. I want them to do what I want. When you're believing that thought, what emotion are you feeling?
I feel freed up that I'm claiming what I want. I mean, I
So
wouldn't
then you don't
think.
need to do the work.
Well, I don't know. This is a shift.
Well, good for you. That's
I mean,
awesome.
it's like I've gone from like, okay, you know, from my sister wanting to bring her people, her company, to like, oh, I want them to do what I want. I want them to support me with my company. You know, that feels freeing. That feels
Yeah.
empowering. I mean, I wouldn't probably have said that. I wouldn't say that to her, or not then, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is it okay if we talk about the session that you did yesterday?
yeah, sure.
So yesterday, Jackie worked on the umbrella statement, and it was something with her sister, and it really came down to boundaries, learning to give an honest no, right, Jackie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you may have so thoroughly done your inquiry yesterday in question 1 that number 2 just doesn't have any negative energy in it anymore. And I do find this happens often when you're very thorough with your first question, the
Uh-huh.
rest of the worksheet kind of collapses.
Interesting.
So, yeah. And so if that's true for you,
Uh-huh.
and you're really clear about how you're setting your boundaries, you know, then you need to find another situation. Okay.
Okay.
That is reliably stressful. And if you're just
Uh-huh.
a total Buddha and you're free, then you can just stay on and you know, be of good cheer.
Okay. I'll see
I'll
which
have
way
what
it goes.
she's having.
You'll have what she's having, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, so is there anyone else who shared an emotion, a stressful emotion that they'd be willing to, Tina, oh, I can always count on you, dear heart. Thank you.
Yeah, well,
So
I'm going back
what's
to
your
my father.
situation? Tina, what's your situation? And
My
then tell us.
father, you know, he basically either ignored me or he was violent.
Yes.
And so I guess like a lot of pain and upset around that situation.
Okay. But did you find a specific memory to work on?
Well, it was always when I wouldn't eat what my mother had cooked for dinner.
Okay.
That
And you've been working on this, and I remember that beautiful sharing that you did last week. And unfortunately, that session didn't get recorded, which is why I want to do it again this week. So, and so it will be fine for you to repeat what you discovered when we get to the turnarounds. But let's go into the pain you feel in that situation with your father. He's angry with you because you're not eating. Where do you feel that pain?
I guess more in the stomach.
Okay. And so are you willing to just sit with it for 60 seconds and, you know, kind of be the guinea pig so that everybody can see how
Oh
this.
yeah, I like being the guinea pig.
I know, I just love it. You're the only extrovert we have, right? I mean, I do it too. I share everything. It's like I have nothing to hide. I tell you. I just know we're all one, and you know, I just want to be free. So, Tina, can you just close your eyes and locate where you feel the pain when your dad's yelling at you and angry with you in that situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still in the stomach.
Okay. And so then the next step, and you don't have to put it back up, Diantha, but the next sub question is describe the sensations. So now we know where it is and what it is. It's the pain in the stomach. Can you describe what the pain really feels like? Get really close to it. And
it's like somebody squeezing my stomach.
Okay, so it's like a contracted energy. Somebody's squeezing. So it takes a lot of courage to do this, but I have found over and over again that if you are willing to just witness that squeezed feeling, and everybody find your own painful sensation, for 60 to 90 seconds, something else will arise. So I'm going to ask everybody now to do that. And then I will ask Tina to share whatever happens in her situation. And if your mind wanders, keep bringing it back to that pain or whatever, wherever you're feeling it in your particular bodies. This is where we rein in those horses of the mind.
It's kind of hard for me to feel it the way I used to feel it as a child.
Okay. So did something shift for you, Tina, when you focused on it?
Well, you know, as I was saying, I think it's hard to feel the intense pain that I felt from this man my entire childhood. So
Right. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that just throughout your life, you've been able to let go of some of that
Oh yeah.
anger. But you just notice there's still something left there that needs attending. And I always say, trust the images that arise. When, you know, if you have that image of being at the dinner table, then it's a sure sign that something is not quite resolved. And so we just stay in the sensation and the emotion. And so Tina noticed that it diminished. Does anybody else have anything they would like to share before we go on to the next sub-question? And just speak up if you want to. Okay, so we're going to move on to another sub-question that helps us identify how we react when we're believing the thought that I want them to do what I want. And of course, they're not doing what we want. Now, Tina, I imagine in your case, you wanted your dad to stop being angry with you. Yeah. You want him to be kind to you. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I wanted attention, but he did not give it to me. So that's why I talked back to him and, you know.
Oh, that's so good to notice. Yes, yes. Thank you. So I want everyone now to just notice, how do you treat that person when you're believing the thought that you want them to do what you want? How do you treat them? And when you've, and these are not easy questions to answer, but if you're willing, please share.
In my case, I was very defiant.
Defiant. So Tina was defiant. And because she wanted attention, and that was the only way you could figure it out as a child, right? I noticed with my husband, when I was believing the thought that he wasn't going to give me what I want, which was to move to Myrtle Beach, I noticed that I distanced myself from him, and I had this low kind of level of sadness, which affected the way I engaged with him. I wasn't as friendly or loving or giving. Can everybody find how they treat that person when they're believing the thought, I want them to do what I want? Yeah. So now we're going to go on to the next sub-question. How do you treat yourself when you're believing that thought? I want them to do what I want. How do you treat yourself? And this is, I often find this one's even more difficult to pinpoint. Tina, do you notice how you were treating yourself?
Yeah, well, I was kind of beating myself up because he wouldn't give me what I wanted. And
Okay.
he was blaming me. So I got on board with that.
So you thought there's something wrong with you?
Yeah.
You did something wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
you're treating yourself like you're at fault. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what he was telling me.
Yeah. Yeah. And these are very common patterns that we all exhibit in many situations, and they are so repetitive. So in my situation with my husband, I left myself. We talk about the three kinds of business. There's my business, your business, and God's business. And every time we go into other people's business, we suffer because we're not there for ourselves. So I was leaving myself and really feeling self-pity. And I was definitely feeling like a victim.
Yeah.
I was feeling like a victim, which is a very disempowered way to be. I was believing that my husband had the key to my happiness. If he could just fulfill this desire and move to Myrtle Beach. We give it all away. And honestly, there's so many more creative ways to get our needs met and to let our ego get diminished in the process. So we're all noticing, was everybody able to find how you treat yourself when you're believing the thought that I want them to do what I want and they're not doing it? I mean, I could feel the sensation in my heart, just as like a contraction in my heart. I'm not breathing very well. My breathing is shallow. So now I just want you to notice, what are you unable to do when you're believing that thought that you want them to do what you want and they're not doing it? What are you unable to do when you're believing that thought?
I guess, I was unable to love myself. I was unable to be cooperative.
Okay, good to notice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina. I noticed in my situation, I was unable to find a creative solution. As long as I was believing that my well-being depended upon my husband moving to Myrtle Beach, I could not find any creative solutions until Baba came and just sat me down and put me through inquiry. And then it all opened up. So we leave ourselves, we go out of our own business, which is one of the premises of the work. We gotta stay in our own business. And Baba tells us our only business is to love him. Baba has said our business is to love him. And so when we can feel Baba in our heart and we're trying to live our life in congruence with all the things that he has guided us with, we really can find creative solutions. And so this last sub-question is a really nice segue into the fourth question of who we would be without the thought. I like to ask sometimes when we're not quite ready to notice who we would be without the stressful thought, what do you fail to see when you're believing that thought? That I want them to do what I want. What do you fail to see when you're believing that thought? I mean, I was failing to see a lot of things that I mentioned earlier that, goodness sakes, why would he move to Myrtle Beach? For all those reasons I said earlier. I was failing to see that. And I was also failing to see that I could find a creative solution, which my husband really supported me with. I actually was going to spend a couple months there until the coronavirus came. But I did get to spend a wonderful month there, and I was really fulfilled, and I was ready to come back home. So sometimes we just fail to see alternatives when we're believing the thought, I want them to do what I want. The mind is meant to be so creative, and when we open our mind and just ask Baba, help me see other possibilities, it's amazing what arises. I mean, for me, this whole virtual inquiry circle arose out of not being able to move to Myrtle Beach. And I just love it. And I wouldn't have met so many of you who live all over the country. And I'm getting emails from people from different parts of the world saying how much these sessions are helping them. And I just feel so grateful to Baba for opening my mind and heart to seeing possibilities. Because I know that my personal path to Baba requires that I keep my marriage intact, you know, and after 33 years and having withdrawn many projections, I do see that he's an ordinary person, and he definitely sees that I'm an ordinary person, and it's just a beautiful thing to love each other with all of our, you know, problems. You know, what could be more lovely than that? So we're going to move on then to question 4. Who would you be without the thought, I want them to do what I want? And gosh, I would love to hear from some of you who have enjoyed sharing before. If you're willing, otherwise we can just have a 2-man show here with Tina and me. So we're done with the sub-questions, and now we're just moving on to question 4. Who would you be without the thought, I want them to do what I want? Who are you, or what are you without that thought?
I would be free.
Beautiful. Yeah. There's a lot of freedom in withdrawing our projections, looking outside of ourselves to get our wants and needs met. And I will say here that I have seen how beautiful life is when I'm not looking to get my needs and my wants met. And I do notice that my relationships change. And I just encourage you to test that out for yourself. You know, just notice that when you stay in your own business and you do these turnarounds, which we're going to move into next, somehow the magic happens and the relationships get lighter and better. And of course, even Tina, I'm imagining that your father has passed on. Is that correct? No. Tina, are you there? Can you unmute for a minute?
Sorry,
Okay.
I just got a phone call.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I was just, now I forget what I was going to ask. Oh, I was going to ask you, has your father passed on?
Yes, he has.
Yes. And so we've talked about in the past that nobody's ever really dead. And so we can still do the work on people that aren't in the body. And,
Yes.
and so Tina, without the thought that you want your dad to do what you want, what do you notice without that thought?
You know, I could just walk away from him. I don't really need anything from him if he's not going to give me what.
Yeah.
I'll just move on.
Okay. Yeah. It's like we can be really creative. We just get on with our life, and you know, we discover what our business is. What are we meant to do in this life? In addition to loving Baba, there's, you know, we got to do things besides love him, because most of us aren't that free to just, you know, sit and love him without having some kind of a life in this world. So let's move on to the turnaround. So Diantha, if you could post the turnarounds for I want them to do what I want. Great, thank you. So in your situation, each one of you has a unique situation. I want you to find 3 genuine specific examples for each of the turnarounds below that could be as true or truer than your original statement. And try to stay in your particular situation. So the first one, instead of saying, I want them to do what I want, we say, I want me to do what I want. So Tina was just talking about in her situation, she can just walk away. She doesn't have to stay around that energy. In my situation,
he was
go ahead.
very adamant that I should eat it. And if I didn't eat it, he would like try to force it down my throat.
Okay. So yes, and so one of the things that we work on from our childhood experiences is recognizing that as children, we just can't do what we want, you know? We're not ready to take our adult place in life. And so, but that doesn't mean we don't get these wounds from our interactions with our parents. But what we can do is we can go back to that image. So for Tina, it's that dinner table scene, not wanting to eat and her dad being angry. We go back inside and we reparent ourselves. So in this situation, Tina would go inside to that child part of herself and just assure her, I am here for you 24/7. I'm the parent you've been waiting for. And you then are able to reintegrate those fragmented parts of yourself, which we know still exist because the image arises and there's a little bit of energy still left on it. You know, the pain in the stomach. And as you reassure that part of yourself, it's like your soul gets restored and all of these disparate parts of ourselves that are still caught in the pain of the past get to be integrated, which is withdrawing the projection. We're withdrawing the projection that, that this angry parent can really hurt us. And we're giving ourselves what we need. And this is a very independent path that helps us to really learn to stand on our own 2 feet. And it also means we ultimately forgive our parents and all of those in our lives, you know, who have been the seeming cause of our sorrow. You know, our souls come in, we create these dramas. So this is an ongoing work. Whenever an image from childhood arises, you have to step in as the adult and say, I'm the parent you've been waiting for, and I will take care of you, and I will protect you. So that, like, even in this current day, if somebody starts yelling at you, Tina, or being rude, you're just going to be there protecting yourself because you're not that little child who has no ability. And as we've talked in previous classes, sometimes we just feel compassion for a person who's angry because we know it's not personal. They are suffering from their own beliefs. We're all walking around carrying these unresolved beliefs and pains, you know, from our life that have been unattended to. So I want me to do what I want. Does anybody have an example they'd like to share before we go on to the turnaround to the other?
I think another nice thing to say to that inner child is that I'll listen to you, because I think that's what's missing a lot of times is just
Beautiful.
someone to listen to
Yes.
what needs to be said. And so that could be part of what I want myself to do.
Oh, yes. I love that. And the thing is because we've neglected those parts of ourselves, sometimes we have to keep reassuring that part of ourselves, that inner child part of ourselves that's still wounded. We have to keep going back and say, I'm not forsaking you. I am here for you. And so it doesn't happen just once. Anytime the pain arises from the past, we can go in and reparent ourselves. And I like to tell the story of Byron Katie's daughter who, you know, before Katie woke up to reality, she was a raging woman and her 3 children were afraid of her. And then when she woke up, you know, her children were like singing The Wicked Witch is Dead, you know, I mean, it was just like a complete transformation. But her daughter still had a lot of issues. You know, she had been extremely rebellious and doing self-destructive behaviors. But Katie would just sit in the house. It took her a few years to reintegrate this awakening into a life where she could serve and share what she had discovered. And so she would watch her daughter go out at night. You know, before Katie had woken up, she had bought her daughter like a red Mustang or something, you know, because that was how she, you know, that was her way of showing love. And Roxanne would come back in the wee hours of the morning and be miserable. And, you know, she was indulging, you know, in alcohol and drugs and all of that. And Katie would just sit in the rocking chair and she was totally peaceful. And then one day Roxanne came in and just cried to her mom, and she said, "Oh, Mom, I'm just so tired of this. I just need to know what I want, what you got, you know." And so she ended up going to one of her mom's workshops, and she was raging at her mom. And she said the most important thing that she ever heard was when her mom said to her, "You are the parent you've been waiting for." Roxanne said that changed everything. She could let it go. Yes, her mom had been cruel to her, had scared all of the children. But for all of us, it's true. We're the parent we've been waiting for. Whatever our parents couldn't give us, we need to give to ourselves. And at the same time, we let our parents off the hook. They were just human, doing the best they could. You know, parents have no magic bullet. They're just humans like all of us, doing the best they can. And what I found as I did the work on my father, who had a temper, the very last time I did the work on him, I felt nothing but radiant love out of my heart. And I've never, ever felt anything since. It's like it's resolved. So we just keep doing the work. It's layers and layers until the job is done. And we know the job is done when those memories just are finished. There's nothing that triggers us anymore. So let's move on to the turnaround to the other. So the turnaround to the other. So Diantha, can you put that up? Yeah. To the other is, I want me to do what they want, or I want them to do what they want. So there's a couple of possible turnarounds here to explore. So just ponder this. These can be very much like mind twisters. But what happens when we apply ourselves to contemplating the turnarounds? I want me to do what they want. So I'm wanting them to do what I want. Well, is there a way I can do what they want? Can I find some sort of compromise here? Maybe it's possible. You know, in my situation, I decided I could go take a nice long holiday to Myrtle Beach and still live here because I love my husband. So I want me to do what they want. And I want them to do what they want. I do want my husband to do what he wants to do. So can anyone find an example of a turnaround to the other that is true for you that you would be willing to share? I want me to do what they want, or I want them to do what they want, which might be easier.
I think for me, I could have just eaten the dinner and not made such a big deal out of it. It was not that great, but you know.
Yeah, yes. Well, and I remember when you were working on your dad before, you had such a beautiful awareness in one of the turnarounds. Do you remember that where?
Yeah, he said he worked hard to put the food on the table and I was disrespecting him. Well,
Yeah.
he didn't have that word then, but you know.
But just hearing you say that, it just opens my heart more. You know, my dad worked hard to put food on the table. I mean, I can appreciate that.
Mhm.
I know in my own experience when I would do things for my kids and I didn't feel like they appreciated it, it was quite painful.
Yeah, it is painful.
Yeah. So we can have compassion. You know, your dad was working hard
And he
and
also, you know, he was, as I said, the last time he was a war hero. And he saved 56 men in Sicily, Salerno, Anzio. He was
wow.
had honors, Purple Heart, gold medals, and, you know, men named their kids after him. He was a huge hero, but not to me.
Oh, yeah. But can you find that now with him where you can honor that service that he
Yeah,
gave?
that was,
Oh, beautiful.
I didn't even know about it at the time.
Yeah. Because I'm telling you, whether you're in or out of the body, you know, we're all one. And when we open our hearts to honor those different individuals who played great roles in our lives, it's such a beautiful thing. Like with my own dad, when I finally released the last layer of even believing that he was something other than my projection, all the things I didn't like about him, I could find in myself. And then I could also really find the things I loved about him. He loved to have fun, and he was really playful and joyful, and he was always singing, and you know, he was an incredible gardener. And it's like I could just like open my heart to appreciate all of those things. So let's look at
I
the,
knew my father very well, but I do, of course, everyone has some good qualities.
yes. And I would imagine, I don't know if this is true, Tina, but to have had that incredible experience during the war could have really had a big effect on him. It might have been really hard to return to his ordinary life.
Yeah, I think a lot of men have that problem.
They didn't diagnose PTSD in those days.
No.
And I think it's really hard when you've been through something like that to integrate back into society. And today, fortunately, we have a lot more empathy and awareness, and there's also more help out there. And in those days, they probably wouldn't have even gone for help. You know,
No.
psychology and all that just wasn't, you know, and I also think about with our parents' generation, they didn't have all these self-help processes that are so readily available to us today. And that's another reason, another awareness that allows us to let them off the hook.
They were very outer directed because I think they had to be to defend the country. And
yeah, it was a different era. It definitely was.
yeah.
So let's look at the turnaround to the opposite. So I think you have to bump it up the page. So here's the turnaround to the opposite. I don't want them to do what I want. Now, why would we say that? In the work, Katie says, loving what is. That's the name of her seminal work, which she calls the textbook for the work. Loving what is means that we embrace life just as it presents itself. And so if they're not doing what we want, we really don't want to change it because we don't want to be in their business. And maybe if it's a psychological thing, maybe they're not ready to change. Or, as in my circumstance, I don't want them to do what I want. I don't want him to suffer by moving to a place that wouldn't make him happy. You know, he loves living. We have mountains, you know, snow-covered mountains here, and he just really likes that. That's what he loves. So I don't want them to do what I want. Can anyone find an example in your situation where that would be true for you? I don't want them to do what I want.
Well, I just surprised myself. I started with a new thesis about my brother, and starting with, let's see, my brother doesn't love me enough to be consistently open, loving, neighborly. And I just had lunch with him and my other sister, and he's not around all that much, and he lives on the property here, and I almost never see him. But I realized when I went to, I don't want him to do what I want, I realized, well, if he were neighborly and around all the time, would I really want that? No, he likes his privacy and he's giving me mine. So
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
yeah, so that's a real shift. I've always
Yeah.
felt like, why can't he be more consistently loving and present and neighborly and caring? And yet he has given me the gift of privacy, and that's what he wanted.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah. Sometimes it's like, be careful what you wish for, right?
right.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any comments?
Well, I remember last week we had talked about not wanting to mess with the sanskaras too much, and so by imposing our will on someone else, we might just make more of a mess.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. Do you have anything else that you can say on that?
Well, like if I were to really think about if I wanted someone to, say support me or do something, supportive that isn't really coming from their heart, I don't want them to do it, first of all. And I don't want to change, like if I'm just living out my sanskaras and they're unraveling naturally, or Baba is working with them and he knows what needs to be done. And if this person isn't doing something, maybe me wishing for that to change or wanting that to change is not really helpful to my sanskaric situation.
Yeah, and that what you said reminds me of the passage I read from Darwin Shaw's book, Effort and Grace. He talked about not coercing. We're not coercing, in this situation. I have to find what he said. Let's see. So here it is. This is from page 37. It is a delicate undertaking to gain control of one's thoughts and feelings without any coercion at all. Effort, yes, but not coercion. So, and then he says it becomes a matter of seeing through the samskaric complexes, which are based on erroneous knowledge, beliefs, and limitations, and being resourceful enough to take evasive action. And all of this is in relation to one's own specific samskaras. So that's exactly what you're referring to, Diantha. And so this really sheds light on this whole awareness of, trying to control situations. I used to try to push things to get my needs met. And it always, even sometimes if you get what you want, the damage, the fallout from doing that causes so much harm. And so it feels like what we're doing in our turnarounds is it's sort of like Tai Chi or martial arts, where we're swerving, we're bending, we're blowing with the breeze, and we're just open to other possibilities that are going to give us what we need. We may not always get what we want. And, Baba tells us constantly that getting what we want just is like a bottomless pit of desire. So it's really interesting because my egoic mind could argue with that and say, yeah, but moving to Myrtle Beach, that's Baba's home in the West. So of course I should be able to move there, yada, yada, yada. But that whole argument is forgetting the life I've shared with my husband, raising our children. He's been the most wonderful provider and friend. He's my best friend. And I would be negating all of that, and so Baba's ways are mysterious, and it's not always what we think, it's very nuanced and it's very individual. And I think as we dive in more deeply into our hearts and ask Baba to help us and really ponder, with our inquiry, life just becomes more subtle. The path to Baba becomes more sublime. And it's not always what our outer mind thinks it is.
You know, with my father, I don't want him to give me what I want because, you know, he's a very damaged individual. And I don't really want to have that much to do with him. You know, keep my distance. And that's what I came to ultimately with him.
Yes. And I think that, I think we can extrapolate from what you said to all of our relationships. You know, I found in my life, as I deepen into my own inner connection to Baba and my own self-inquiry, certain people in my life just dropped away. And I felt sad at first, you know, like I was trying to hold on to certain relationships, but I've come to see over time that they get removed. We have the people in our life that we need to have to show us where our work is. Because whatever we're thinking and believing that's stressful, we need to withdraw that projection and do our inner work and, you know, take it through these 4 questions if this modality works for us, and come to find that what we believe we need isn't always what we need. And especially, I always like to say with Baba, we're so fortunate because he's our center, you know, he's the lodestone. We really can't go far wrong as long as we keep remembering him.
Yeah, he's our real father.
He is. He's the real father. He's the real everything. You know, he's the child too. He's the friend, you know, he's the, and in the Sufi tradition, he is the beloved. We're in the lover-beloved relationship with him. And that is, you know, what I like to think of as the mystical marriage in the heart, you know, and in psychological terms, it's the integration of our masculine and feminine sides. And when those are completely balanced, then we can live in that place more and more. So I'm just looking at the time. We have a little bit more time, and let's see, I had another quote from Darwin Shaw. I'm going to see if it is apropos to what we're doing right now. Page 72. It's just a little quote. Okay, this is perfect. Everything's always like just ideal. So Darwin is talking about the path of self-effacement. And he's talking about when Baba read out the message from the East-West Gathering in 1962. He said, "My dear workers," and he said, "the way of my work is the way of effacement, which is the way of strength, not of weakness. And through it, you become mature in my love." So this path, this is Darwin talking now. So this path involves developing a more selfless attitude. The hallmark of spiritual progress is through self-effacement rather than worthiness. With our awareness that we are really nothing, comes the realization that we do not have to try to be anything anymore. We finally decide to give up the futile pursuit of trying to become something. The situations that come up in our lives give us ideal opportunities to see where we are still claiming something. As we give up those claims, giving everything to Baba and letting go, we then begin to see everything as myopic and not serious. In other words, we come to realize that life itself is not to be taken seriously. It is no longer seen as reality. We turn off the wanting machine and remain calm and undisturbed within. All this is part of the path of self-effacement. So does anybody have any comments on what I just read? mean, what comes up for me is how questioning our stressful thoughts and noticing how we've projected what we want out there onto someone, and now we're taking back the projection and giving ourselves what we really need instead of what we think somebody else was supposed to give us. And then we notice, as Darwin says, that life itself is not to be taken seriously. It's no longer seen as reality. And Baba tells us this world is an illusion, and it's just here for our awakening. So hopefully with these inquiry sessions, we're able to systematically and methodically find those beliefs that we're still holding on to and just withdrawing them bit by bit by bit until we just find a more spacious awareness that lives inside of us, which is the real reality. The reality is when we become one with Baba and when we notice our thoughts and don't believe them. You know, it's like Byron Katie says, if you're having a beautiful thought, just enjoy it. But no thought is true. We're moving beyond the realm of thought. Thought is just a layer that keeps us from our true awareness of our real nature, which is love. We are love. So I just have a note here, because Darwin talks about the subconscious, and we haven't really talked so much about that. And so the unconscious is what we cannot deliberately access, and it's primal, it's instinctual, it stores primal instinctual thoughts. That's what I meant to say. And the subconscious is the information that's not fully consciously processed. So we can look at the subconscious as being in between the unconscious and the conscious. And I believe that our dreams, the dreams we have, are kind of the subconscious awareness. And sometimes, you know, we can have actually dreams that are very spiritually oriented, but oftentimes it's just things that are beneath the surface that we're not quite able to access. But Baba tells us that when the unconscious becomes fully conscious, we realize God. So this work here is ongoing until we actually realize our oneness with God. So I'm going to read one closing quote, and this is from Mayor Baba Calling, page 42. Baba says, however far man may fling himself into outer space, he will not change. Wherever he goes, he will remain what he is. It is when man travels within himself that he experiences a metamorphosis of himself. It is this journeying that matters, for the infinite treasure, God, is within man and not to be found outside himself. The universe has come out of me and has to come unto me. So, Jai Baba, everyone, and thank you so much for sharing this inquiry.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Jai Baba.
Thank you.
Jai Baba. Thank you, Anne.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
So next week we're going to work on the advice that we would give them when we're believing the thought that they don't love me enough. So if you can get your copy of a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet, we will be doing that. And where's my worksheet here? So here's the advice that we're going to work on next week. And you don't need to write it down, but if